Japanese sentence final particles. What do they do? Do they do things? Let's find out. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how Japanese sentence final particles work, but just the major ones. I'm not going to talk about ones that are involved in dialects because I don't want this video to be 5 hours and I'm also not an expert on that. But hopefully this is in more detail than you've seen in, other videos. Although I'm sure I will forget to mention at least one of them and someone will comment in the video, why didn't I mention that one? In which case, it's because I forgot. Alright, so let's start with the big three, which most people learn in their introductory Japanese classes, and that is ka, yo, and ne. In polite Japanese, ka is very easy. It just turns something into a question and there's no real implications beyond that. So, oishii desu is it is delicious. Oishii desu ka is a question asking if it is delicious. When we move out of the so-called polite desmos form though, it becomes more complicated. So let's put that aside and move on to ne and yo. Ne is sort of like a confirmation particle. When used, it assumes that the person you are talking to kind of agrees with you and seeks confirmation of that agreement. It's like the bonding particle. When you say something is oishii ne instead of just oishii, you think it's delicious, you think the person you're talking to thinks it's delicious, and you would like them to confirm that relationship. I would say it's therefore one of the most straightforward ones, as that's sort of the primary meaning, whereas with yo we start to move into particles that have a bit more of a spectrum of a meaning. One way to think of particles often is kind of like tone of voice, although the problem is, of course, that Japanese also has tone of voice, and that affects the particles, so it's not really a one-to-one, and that's definitely the case for yo. On the lighter end of the scale, yo can just be kind of an emphasizer. Like if someone tells you something and you agree with it, you can use yo in your response to emphatically agree. In other cases though, yo is used when you want to stress something to somebody, especially presuming that they don't know that thing and they should. As a result, overuse of no can sound like you're talking down to somebody or scolding them. So if we were to compare these three kind of in just a simple sentence, if I were to say atsui desu, that would mean it is hot, fact. Atsui desu ka would be a question of, is it hot? I do not know. Atsui desu ne is, I think it's hot, I think you think it's hot, and I would like you to confirm that. And then atsui desu yo is probably a warning, as in, this is hot and I think you don't know that, but I think you need to know that. Although in a different context, for instance, where someone says atsui desu ne and you go, oh, atsui desu yo, could be a confirmation, whereas they're saying it's hot, right? And you're like, yeah, it is so hot, you're so right. I should also mention that these all work with so desu in kind of important ways. On its own, so desu is just that's right. So desu ka is that so, like, oh, I did not know that. It's something you say in response to new information that you were not aware of. Whereas so desu ne is like, yeah, that is how it is. You are right. I agree with you. So desu yo is then like a more emphatic version of that that's like you are absolutely on the money. Importantly though, so desu ne can be used in kind of buy time when responding to a question, like, oh yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? In which case it's like, oh, so desu ne. And that is kind of buying time. A common mistake I see beginners make when I give oral tests in Japanese, they'll use this instead of so desu ka. So desu ka again being for new information. So if you ask someone a question, like, what are you going to do tomorrow? And they say, I'm going to go to a cafe. You don't say, oh, so desu ne. Because that's like, yeah, I knew that. In which case, why did you ask the question? And also, why do you know that? That's creepy. So desu ka is used for new information. So desu ne is used to buy time before your own answer, or to show alignment with a statement rather than a question. Now, to loop back to ka has a very different use in the so-called plain form, which is often associated with casual Japanese. And here, context and tone of voice are going to create a huge different range of meanings. On the lighter side, this can be just kind of a casual or semi-roughish way of asking a question. Like if you see in a media a father or something turning to their kid and being like, "Ja ikou ka," or offering a snack and be like, "Taberu ka." That's just like, a rough question kind of way. In other cases though, this can be very aggressive, haughty, presumptuous, and rhetorical. So for instance, a certain tone of voice, "Moshiroi ka," could be like, "Oh, you think that's funny, huh?" Going back to the atsui example, like, "Atsui ka. Ah, it's hot for you, is it? You pathetic, worm." But there's also a use that's kind of like reflexive, like, "Oh, that's how it is." So if I was like, oh, atsui ka, like, oh, it's because it's hot, right? I'm thinking to myself, it can have those kind of vibes. The important thing to note about ka in the plain form is that it never has a just neutral question meaning. The neutral way to ask a question in the plain form is just rising intonation. To over-exaggerate for the video, omoshiroi, interesting, funny. Omoshiroi, interesting, funny, question, right? It's all done with tone of voice. If you have ka at the end of omoshiroi, you're always implying something, and that's why it's often not taught to beginner learners, is that something can be offensive. Indeed, if used incorrectly or in the wrong context, ka can basically work like a swear word in English. For instance, shiruka, which is literally no question. It's often used in Japanese to translate English statements like, who gives a fuck? Or how the hell would I know? And in terms of impact, that is an accurate translation. If someone asks you something and you don't know the answer, do not respond with shiruka. The other major particles then are often warned against because they can be gendered, and just like I talked about in my video on pronouns, this does not mean only men use one or only women use one, but they are more expected to or associated with men or women. But these associations change over time, they change between communities, they change across geographic boundaries. Indeed, there's plenty of research showing that sentence final particles that at one time were neutral have become gendered and vice versa. But in contemporary Japanese then, zo and zei are specifically associated with men, although they're also considered to be a bit rough and crude, in kind of the idea that if a man uses it, it's a bit informal and rough. If a woman uses it, it's doubly informal and rough. Women do use these, but the social backlash can be higher. And zei, basically, to give an oversimplification, are rough and crude versions of yo. They are emphasizers, with zei being cruder than zo. So like yaruyo, yaruzo, and yaruze are all basically just like, I will do it emphasized. But the latter two sound cruder, and they sound even cruder than that. Indeed, these particles are sometimes on their own used to translate swearing in English. I recently did a study where I looked at the translations of swearing in The Boys and Russian Doll into Japanese, and there were many cases where zo and zei were used. Interestingly though, The Boys never use zo or zei when translating women's swearing, and Russian Doll refused to use zei for women's swearing. So again, that gendered ideology there is appearing in the media data. That said, zo and zei can have kind of like a, we're a rough and tumble kind of team vibe to them. You may see them used when people are kind of like trying to get their team to do things together. There's kind of a threatening, crude aspect to them, but there can be a very casual, do not do this like in your office, but let's fight, let's go, let's get them. We're a rough and tumble team kind of vibe that they can express. The particles wa and no are then kind of associated with women's speech in some cases. Wa especially is considered like a feminine particle, and again, in some cases it's kind of like a feminine yo. There's also though a wa with a falling intonation, which again is kind of an emphasizer that's associated more with Kansai region and men. Although honestly, I've seen both be used by both groups. It's important to note that the use of wa by women, especially in 2025, is much more common in Japanese media than it is in real life. Especially the polite form like desu wa are kind of fading out of style, especially again for younger people. And you can easily find men saying wa, they're not speaking in any dialect and are not really having a falling intonation, so it is out there. And personally, if you're a man scared of using wa, I'd say you haven't really lived until you've actually experienced the kind of vibe that makes you say, ureshi wa. Because there's some things that just wa expresses quite well. No then, to the best of my knowledge, comes from the no des or ndes form, which is kind of explanatory. It was often used to kind of ask for more information, like "Nanyo taberu no?" is again like, hey, give me some details, etc. But again, this form is more associated with women's speech, especially the combination no-yo, which is part of kind of like an even older form of women's speech known as kind of the teio dawa form, that was first established as vulgar, then encouraged for women to speak, and now has again kind of faded away. You mainly see a lot of these in anime, etc., when there's kind of a haughty, fancy lady who is showing off how haughty and fancy and upper class they are. No can also have some kind of like emphatic or even assertive vibes to it, but again, in a softer way than yo, certainly softer than zo or zei, or potentially even wa. Na is then used by pretty much everybody, and it's a nice little one that kind of has a reflective, like, yes, that is so, like, oishii na. It's kind of like, yes, that takes me back. I call it like a memory particle, if that makes any sense. It kind of turns whatever you're saying into a monologue briefly as you reflect on how you feel about something. It can also be used to show appreciation though, like, yoku yaru na, which is like a compliment, like you're doing really good, and I recognize that to myself a bit, but obviously because I'm speaking to you as well. Don't mix this up though with the na that is used to mean don't, because while yoku yatta na is good, yaru na is do not do that, right? If you just put na at the end of a verb in the plain form with a stern tone of voice, you're telling someone not to do something in a very commanding manner, which again, in some cases can be insulting or haughty. And then the last major one that I think is out there a lot is sa, which kind of has like an vibe in some ways, but it can also sound like casual, assertive, or even sometimes flippant. Sometimes people use it like right when they're about to kind of change the subject. Or for instance, in phrases like ano sa, when they're about to just jump in and state their own opinion, oftentimes in a way that contradicts other people. It's not something you see in formal speech, and again, can be a little bit risky to use. Anyway, those are the major ones. I guess the only thing I'd say to be really careful about is context is really king for all of these. The vibes that they give off in casual context versus say formal context is quite different. So while it might be okay to use zo and zei and with your friends, using them to say your boss is probably a bad idea. In my video on pronouns, I ended by saying one of the best things to do with pronouns is just go to Japan, use watashi for a long time, and pay attention to the kind of people that use various pronouns, and then use that to decide which one's the best for you in which context. I said avoid manga and anime, etc., because the choice of pronoun is often kind of character-based and stylized. For sentence final particles, I think honestly the best thing you can do to get the vibe of them is to watch anime, read manga, check out media. They're often not statements specific to character identities, but to the contextual impact of the utterance, and paying real attention to how yo, how zo, how zei, etc. are used, noting that, again, pretty much every single study on Japanese linguistics in the history of time since people started paying attention to Japanese media notes that the use of these in media is much higher and much more stereotyped gender-wise, even context-wise, than seen in real life. Can really help you understand kind of the vibe of it, even if you're not really good at Japanese and you're mainly paying attention to the translation. If you're looking at the translation, looking at the nei and kind of trying to figure out what the nei's role in there is, that will help you understand ne. Although, there's one final caveat, do note that there are kind of sentence final forms that actually exist basically only in media, especially there's something that we call in academia the karagobi, or like the character ending, and these are phrases that exist like only to fantasy types of characters, like for instance a cat might say nyan at the end of their sentence, or like if you play Final Fantasy and you're wondering why moggles say kupo, because that's their karagobi, they just put kupo at the end of their sentence, it's their sentence final particle. Pigs say boo, things like that, don't use those. If you're watching an anime about a pig, don't start saying desu boo in the middle of a sentence. Unless you're pretending to be a pig, in which case, go ahead. Solabu. Inyan. But yeah, I don't have an ending. I just hope this was useful. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just making a video. There you go. Enjoy. Or not. And if you didn't, I don't know. Monku yunayo ze zazo wa da na boo.